appointed hour so that we could begin this discussion of this particular panel relating to the economic aspects of the index. Now, we've been talking this afternoon and early this morning about the index because it assesses governments on their delivery of public goods and services in 4 categories: security and rule of law, participation, rights and inclusion, human development, and now we're coming to discuss the foundations for economic opportunity. I must tell you that the discussions that we've held so far have been very rich. They've been enlightening. They've been reflective of deep thought that had been given, and the energy that has come across has been positive energy of constructive ideas and constructive acceptance of criticisms that could help to push the governance index more positively for Liberia. And it has been delightful, and it is delightful to see the level of interest and support for this event that, as has been evidenced by the participation of distinguished members of the Liberian society and members of the Liberian government, including members of presidents' cabinets, and that's former presidents and current president's cabinet. We've had the military at its highest operational level, the chief of the army staff here. We've had academia, professors, we've had the private business sector, and we've had civil society. So to us, your presence speaks to the willingness of all to engage in positive and constructive discussions that acknowledge the strengths and deficits in governance. And we're very happy that we are having this level of discussion, which is reminiscent of discussions that have been held over time on how best to move Liberia forward with governance as a key element of achieving that end. Our moderator this afternoon is a distinguished scholar and manager, Dr. Aloysius Uche Ordu, is a senior fellow and director of the Africa Growth Initiative in the Global Economy and Development Program at Brookings Institution. Prior to taking up his appointment at Brookings, he was managing partner at Omapu Associates LLC, a boutique advisory services and consulting firm. He previously served, and as you mentioned, you heard him mention the African Development Bank, as vice president of the African Development Bank. And he served prior to being elevated to the position of vice president of the ADB. He was regional director for Eastern Africa, covering Burundi, Kenya, Rwanda, Seychelles, Tanzania, and Uganda. He's worked also at the World Bank, where he was for over 22 years and served in various leadership positions there, including Director of Operations Policy and Country Services, Operations Director for Latin America and the Caribbean region, Country Manager for the Philippines, Manager for Development Effectiveness, Middle East and North Africa region, and Manager of the Young Professionals Program. He led the design of investment projects in diverse sectors, including urban water and sanitation, agriculture, irrigation, and rural development, energy, and transport infrastructure. So we have with us as moderator of this distinguished panel, someone who brings a perspective that is broad from his many years of service in various countries around the world and in the development industry itself, concerned also with matters pertaining to investment. But before turning over to Dr. Ordu, I would like to invite the Mo Ibrahim team that is here with us, Camila Roca and Ines Schultes, to give us an overview of what the Ibrahim Index of African Governance looks like with respect to Liberia, and greater insight into how it has been structured. So Camilla, please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this kind introduction. Just a technical question. Can someone from the team add Ines as a panelist? Because I think she was added as audience and she would need the panelist rights. In the meantime, I will start by taking you through a very quick presentation. I mean, this is the fourth panel. I don't know how many of you have been engaged in this very interesting discussion. We have, as Mr. Cooper just explained, we have touched upon so many issues related to governance using the index of African governance by the Mawine Foundation as a starting point. And now we're going to sort of wrap up with this last category, Foundation for Economic Opportunity, which will also, I guess, give us an opportunity to really analyze the cross links between all the various governance dimensions. I will just take you through a very quick presentation that we prepared with the team. Not sure who was there in the previous panel, so I will quickly introduce you to what is the index and how we go about building this comprehensive tool for assessing African governance. As Mr. Cooper rightly introduced, the index is a tool that has been established by the Mawine Foundation with the specific focus of supporting governance and any stakeholder interested in African governance to measure and assess governance progress across 54 African countries. This is the definition of governance. Basically, it is rooted in the relationship between citizens and governments, and it is about the goods that citizens have the right to expect from their state and the sort of public social and economic goods that states have responsibility to deliver to citizens. The index was then created as a statistical data set that helps sort of assessing progress across these areas. It was introduced already. It is founded on 4 categories, and we're going today to discuss the results of Liberia for one of these. About the methodology, this is a question we are often asked. So I just wanted to take you through the journey of a data point. The index relies on external sources. For the time being, we are using 40 sources, and from the raw data selected by source, we go through all these different steps until the final results. How do we go about choosing the data? As I said, the index relies on 40 plus external sources, and the selection of the data, besides obviously being relevant for the governance proxies that we are measuring in the index, is based on the need to cover at least 33 of 54 African countries to ensure comparability across data. And we also put a lot of importance into having recent data. So there are like additional statistical criteria to make sure that we have data within the last 3 years and at least 2 years worth of data point within the decade, because the index measures governance across a 10-year time series, and it is published every 2 years. How do we go about putting together all these different scores and data from different sources? We firstly have to put them into the same scale, because obviously every source uses different classification criteria. And once they are put at the same scale, they are then aggregated into the various levels that compose the index, from indicator all the way to the overall governance score. It is important to note that since we reviewed the index in the past 2 years, we have now 90% of indicators that are clustered, meaning they rely on more than a source and a variable to assess the respective governance measure. And this is quite important because it certainly mitigates the bias of using single variable and single sources, and considering that we revise the index every time we publish the data set, we also hope that going forward, we can really get this number to 100% and also continue including additional data that is produced on the governance measures that are composing the index, and especially African data. Before going into the Liberia results, I just wanted to showcase as a background for context, what are the results at continental level? Because certainly the index shows us that within the last decade, there has been an improvement in governance across the continent. More than half of African citizens are living in 2019 in a country where governance has improved compared to 2010. And this is certainly progress that needs to be highlighted. However, when we look at the drivers of change, we can see here that on the one hand, positive change has been driven by these two categories, human development and foundation for economic opportunity, that we are going to analyze more in depth for Liberia in a second. On the other hand, this positive progress has happened at the same time as alarming declines in security and rule of law and participation rights and inclusion. This is quite important because it will sort of reflect as well in some of the data for Liberia. And it's also an important message to sort of recap the discussion that we had today, because you have to consider that the index is based on an unweighted model. So for us, each of the four categories count as much as all the others. And therefore, we do need to reflect quite a lot about the trade-off that seems to be happening here at continental level, and what are the next steps to sort of readdress and make sure that basically the path towards governance progress is harmonious and balanced across the continent. Now, if my colleague is on, she will take you through the results for Liberia, and starting with the overall governance one. Ines, are you there?
Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you.
So yeah, when we look at Liberia, so these are the scores over the 10 years for the four categories, but also for overall governance. So Liberia scores 47.9 out of 100 on the index, and this means it's kind of based right in the middle of the ranking table at 27th place out of the 54 countries in the index. Liberia has improved its overall governance score over the last decade, which is a very positive development. However, we have seen that between 2015 and 2019, which is the midpoint of the 10 years in the index, Liberia has actually declined in overall governance. And this is one of the largest declines for this time period on the continent in overall governance. And also, what is also worrying, that the decline that we have seen in overall governance between 2015 and 2019 has been 4 times faster than the progress that has been made over the 10 years. So if we look at the categories now that have driven this decline, Camilla, if you could switch to the next slide, please. We see that it's actually 3 of the categories in Liberia have improved over the 10 years. So this is security and rule of law, foundations for economic opportunity, which we're going to discuss a bit closer in a moment, and human development. And then the one that has kind of been declining over the 10 years as well is participation rights and inclusion. However, what we do see for both security and rule of law, and also for foundations of economic opportunity, as they're highlighted here in like a kind of pink shade, means that these 2 categories have been declining since 2015 as well. So they're basically also behind that decline that we see at the overall governance level. Going into a bit more foundations for economic opportunity now. The next slide, please. We see that foundations for economic opportunity is Liberia's most improved of the categories. But as said, it has had these warning signs since 2015. So what are we seeing at the subcategory level? We see a very large improvement in public administration, but this has kind of slowed down since 2015. The same with infrastructure, very large improvement, but also has kind of slowed down. And then we also see business environment, which has declined over the decade, while the rural sector is showing warning signs. And then business environment, which we see here has already declined over the decade. Between 2015 and 2019, it's the third most, Liberia is the third most declined country on the continent for this subcategory. So which are the indicators that are driving this kind of trends that we see at the subcategory level? So as we can see here, there are some very positive developments, such as in civil registrations, so birth and death certificates, for example. It's the most improved indicator in this subcategory, in this category. Also, and we discussed this shortly in the last panel, actually, access to energy, which also improved quite a lot, but still scores very low. Also regional integration, which obviously is also a topic that becomes ever more important, or also mobile communications. Then on the other hand, if we go to those indicators that are driving the decline, we see, for example, infrastructure, it's the transport network, so that's roads, trains, and airline traffic. Also, there seems to be an issue with the professional administration has declined, but also we see trade environment is also very low scoring. And it's, in fact, Liberia is the second low scoring country on the continent for this indicator. Only Eritrea scores even lower for trade environment. And also a lot of things, as we discussed with business environment as the most declined subcategory, things like business competition and also labor relations. So this is the quick overview of what we see in Foundations for Economic Opportunity. And I'm interested to hear what the panelists will do with these results and we'll discuss. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ines. Thank you, Camila. As the moderator, the session is yours.
Right. Brother Seward, thank you. Thank you very much. And Camila and Ines, thank you very much for the excellent presentation. And to our panelists, esteemed panelists and audience in Liberia and across the world, I'm very delighted to be here at the invitation of the Madam Ellen Johnson Sirleaf Center for Women and Development. I believe you'll all agree with me that the work of the foundation, the Mawine Foundation, has really, really, over the years, been of tremendous consequence for our continent. They have really escalated this whole issue of governance, which is so important, governance and institutions for our continent. And it gives me great pleasure to be a part of this. As you already heard, we're dealing today, this afternoon, in this last segment, with the Foundations for Economic Opportunity, covering the 4 areas that were articulated by Ines and Camila on public administration, business environment, infrastructure, and rural development. We heard a couple of things from Camila and Ines, that Liberia has overall made tremendous progress, improvements in some areas. That was acknowledged. We also heard that there were previous areas of improvements that have slowed in some areas. And then the other third bucket we heard was that there are warning signs of reversals in some areas in terms of progress. And finally, those areas that have actually deteriorated. So to help us shed light on Liberia's performance, we couldn't ask for a more esteemed and distinguished audience, panelists than we have today. We have Honorable Boima Kamara, previously served as Minister of Finance and Development Planning in Liberia. He was previously Deputy Governor, Economic Planning at the Central Bank. He is currently, among many other things he does, international consultant at UNECA. I'd like to bid you a warm welcome, Boima. We also have Honorable Mawine Dix, the Minister of Commerce and Industry, Liberia. She previously served as Deputy Minister of Administration, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and prior to that, she served as Acting Minister and Special Presidential Envoy. I would like to welcome you, Honorable Dix. We also have Honorable Monie Captan, currently an Adjunct Associate Professor at IBB School of International Relations. Previously, he's obviously not a stranger to our continent and to Liberia. He was indeed Minister of Foreign Affairs and most recently served as CEO of the Millenium Challenge account in Liberia. And finally, we have Honorable Jeanine Cooper, who's currently Minister of Agriculture in Liberia. She's been founder of the FABRA Liberia in 2009, now Liberia's largest rice producer. I think I'm on good authority to confirm that. And she previously served in the United Nations for many, many years. So panelists, brothers, sisters, I'd like to bid you all a warm welcome. And a couple of ground rules. Each panelist will have 3 to 5 minutes to make a quick opening remark about what we just heard from our colleagues of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation about what the report on the Liberia segment talks about. And I'd like to basically start by asking Honorable Kamara, 3 to 5 minutes, please. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Ordu. Looking at the beauty of what the Mo Ibrahim Foundation has done, I just want to say thanks to all of the professional staff at the institution and the founder. Quality of work in harnessing large data, which is important for policy formulation and decision making.
Right.
So just looking at the aspect under the Foundation for Economic Opportunity that deals with public administration, the data has informed us that in terms of the best performer will be the subsection that has to do with civil registration, of which you found that birth registration, death registration over the 10-year period is the best performer within the subsection of a change of 50. And that is something that we want to just say that is a monumental achievement. And to the extent that in 2019, the country was ranked 5th on that specific subsection in the context of civil registration. So kudos to the government and all of those who are in the process of ensuring that the vital statistics is kept up to date. So in unpacking, if you come over to the next subsection that has to do with capacity of the statistical system, again, it shows that government has, over the 10-year period, did so well, even within the last 5 years, to ensure that staffs are properly trained at the Liberia, the LIGIS, which is the Liberia Information for Information Services, the statistical house in Liberia, to see a change of around 28.8. So that's good. And if you zero in further regarding statistical capacity, and just you want to look at in terms of data coverage and openness, again, it shows marked improvement of a change over the decade of around 12, plus 12 change. However, under that subsection regarding capacity of the statistical system, there is an issue that relates to the independence of the National Office for Statistics. So the data is reflecting that in terms of the change regarding data, is on data coverage, not on the statistical office, but on data coverage, there is a decline of a -5. So that calls for some attention. So those are areas for attention that the government has to give regarding data coverage. So my own experience when I work at the central bank within the Department of Research before becoming deputy governor, our limited scope of the survey, especially that has to do with inflation, is just limited to Monrovia. The extent to which, I don't know now if it can be widened outside of Monrovia and look at the highly active economic centers, say Central Liberia, Bom County, look at Ningma County. So bringing those on board will be very important in terms of improving this performance and then reverse such a deteriorating trend. Just quickly, I'm looking at the context of tax resource mobilization. That is very relative to taxation and revenue mobilization. Again, over the period on that sub-thematic area, we showed change over the 10-year period. However, the last 5 years, commencing 2015, our ranking has been declining to the extent that there is a slow rate of improvement of just 2.4. But what is important that the data is bringing up, when you want to look at in terms of assessing the extent to which there's efficiency in revenue mobilization, the decade shows a declining trend of a -1, a -8 for the matter. So, and that's a concern. So the extent to which our tax mobilization efforts regarding revenue generation, so there's a need to revisit it. Yeah. Where are we in the context of the efficiency in the system? Are we still largely focusing maybe on Monrovia, the extent to which the base of revenue collection is not yet broadened or widened? So those are some issues that the data is suggesting that we need to look at.
1 more minute, please.
And the same applies for the budget. So significant deterioration when it has to do with the budget in terms of the public financial management, showing deteriorating trend of 5, -5, -10. And then except for the areas of the public administration that focuses on the extent to which we can improve on the professional administration. So who are the staff within positions across government? Are they people of institutional memory? How were they recruited? Because this assessment of almost -17 decline is a call for concern that we need to pay more attention in terms of how we are recruiting public servants. So the need for the civil service reform could be a place of attention. So I will end on this note. Yeah. We commend the extent to which the government over the decade in the last 5 years has performed on the overall foundation for economic opportunities, but the subsections is pointing to key areas for reforms. I will end on this note for now.
Honorable Kamara, thank you very much. We will dig a little bit deeper into some of the things you made, and excellent. Let's now turn to Honorable Diggs, please.
Thank you. Excellencies, fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen, it is truly an honor for me to make remarks and serve on this panel seeking to deal with the foundations for economic opportunity in Liberia in relation to the findings of the Ibrahim Index of African Governance, particularly our business environment. So at a time when the world is faced with the COVID-19 pandemic and its disruption of the flow of trade and supply chain, we must all not lose sight of the provision of quality leadership for our people, which is the singular most important task we have as a government. The usage of tools such as the IIAG and the assessment it provides will continue to serve as a guide to policy formulation processes, which will in effect deliver the much needed quality services to our people through our government's pro-poor agenda for prosperity and development. So let me, on behalf of the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, join other panelists to thank former President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf and all the hardworking staff and dedicated members of the EJS Center for putting together this event and selecting me to address this body. It is an opportunity that I am grateful for. So according to the latest edition of the IIAG, with an African average score of 47.8% in 2019, the Foundations for Economic Opportunity ranks third amongst the 4 IIAG categories, ranking closely behind human development and security and rule of law. There have been sizable improvements over the decade, which means it's no longer the lowest scoring category in the IIAG as it was in 2010 and has since overtaken participation, rights, and inclusion. So Foundations for Economic Opportunity is the most improved category in the IIAG, with a score increase of about 4.1% over a 10-year period. So the focus of discussion on the business environment, as we've seen in the data, highlights indicators of regional integration and access to financial services as increases. And then there are some slight declines and concern as it comes to the trade environment, and then reflections on those in terms of a slight decline. So we have to find a way where those can be balanced. So when you look at today in Liberia, access to finance is still a challenge for our small and medium enterprises, commonly known as SMEs, as well as other businesses. So that is why our government, through the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, in collaboration with our development partner, UNDP, we're currently implementing a project called the Livelihood and Employment Creation Project, which will address the structural issues these individuals face when trying to access financing from various lending institutions. And these include a formulation and registration of petty traders, which form a huge part of our informal trade sector. And so this will help enhance their ability in writing of business plans and also establishing a registry for these petty traders to allow us the ability to track and be able to monitor and move them from the informal to formal sector. Hence, this will give us the opportunity to enhance the trade environment, which currently exists within Liberia. So at the moment, with the increased mobile and internet access across Liberia, we anticipate an enhanced e-commerce business and trade regime for our SMEs and a new type of trade and investment in our economy. So today, SMEs remain the key driver for job creation, microeconomic stability, and overall growth of the economy. And as a means of improving business environment and consistent with requirements for the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement, the government has abolished pre-shipment inspection, and by January 1 of 2022, we will fully roll out the destination inspection regime for all goods shipped to Liberia. These are all steps taken to facilitate trade and improve doing business in Liberia. Additionally, the Ministry of Commerce and Industry is working with the World Bank on the rollout of the Liberia Economic Recovery and Transformation Project, which seeks to support our business registry with upgrading of its systems and operations, also fully operationalizing the National Standards Laboratory to enhance export, and implementing the National Single Window, which would synchronize multiple government functionaries in one place, thereby eliminating red tape. So all of these initiatives by the government and its development partners aim to facilitate trade and improve our business environment and address some of the challenges pointed out in the IIAG. We're optimistic that by the second quarter of next year, we will be reporting significant improvements and increased support to our businesses. Our president has repeatedly assured investors and those interested in doing business in Liberia that we are open for business. And I can emphatically say we are taking every step to ensure our business environment is friendly enough to support the plan. The Ministry of Commerce and Industry has also commenced the process of digitalizing the import notification form process, which is very key in solving some of the challenges with importation today. With this measure in place, there will be a reduction in the turnaround time for approvals and an increase in efficiency levels. Okay. The Liberian Senate has before it a bill seeking to grant autonomy to the National Standards Laboratory, which will improve their capacity and ensure the quality of goods manufactured locally and those imported meet accredited standards. We're working with the Senate. Yes, we're working with the Senate by providing the much needed technical support to ensure that this bill is passed and forwarded to the desk of the president for signature. The Ministry of Commerce and Industry team continues to review laws on the books to ensure that they're in line with the current economic and trade realities and properly aligned with the PAPD so that proposed amendments can be made where necessary for the overall improvement of the business climate. An improved business climate and broader investment for development provides the greatest opportunity with the highest return in tackling systemic weaknesses and failures and limited capacities that impede growth for the real economy. With proper leadership, a vision, and political will at all levels of authority, the real catalyst to reforms which yield transformations that are only realized through trade investments will begin to be actualized. So the government of Liberia will continue to take the necessary steps to support local businesses enhance the trade regime, and improve the climate under which business is conducted. So we thank you and look forward to further engagement.
Thank you, Honorable Diggs. Thank you very much. Again, we'll touch on some of the things you indicated for greater details. Let me now turn to my brother and Honorable Monie Captan, please.
Okay, sorry. Thank you, Dr. Ordu. I will speak specifically on the electricity infrastructure.
Okay.
The IIAG scorecard reports that access to energy in Liberia has increased by 21.7% over the past 10 years, from a score of 1.1 in 2010 to 22.8 in 2019. Despite this increase, Liberia remains far below the African average. However, it is important to note that this improvement reflects a decade of infrastructure development after a full devastation of the energy infrastructure during the Liberian Civil War. The reconstruction of Liberia's energy infrastructure can be attributed to significant investment in the sector by development partners, including the US government through the Millennium Challenge Corporation and USAID, the World Bank, the European Union, European Investment Bank, African Development Bank, the government of Germany, Norway, Sweden, and Japan. Additionally, a new electricity law was passed in 2015, which liberalized the electricity sector and created an independent regulatory commission. This development is expected to expand private sector participation in the electricity sector, thus meeting future electricity demands in an efficient market-driven environment. Significant effort and resources have gone into electricity infrastructure, especially generation, transmission, and distribution. I expect an increase in access rates as ongoing projects are rolled out. A significant achievement in the sector is the rehabilitation of the Mount Coffee Hydroelectric power plant with an installed capacity of 88 megawatts. This hydropower plant has increased Liberia's base generation capacity from 38 megawatts to 126 megawatts, representing a 232% increase in generation capacity, which has contributed to increased access to electricity. This generation capacity does not include self-generation by private households and enterprises. In addition to the current generation infrastructure, Liberia now has access to a regional transmission line under the CLSG project, which will facilitate trade of electricity among neighboring countries, namely La Côte d'Ivoire, Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea. Liberia is currently negotiating a power purchase agreement with La Côte d'Ivoire to supplement its current electricity supply. Transmission and distribution have also significantly increased with the ongoing consolidation project in Monrovia to improve the capacity and reliability of the network. Completion of the Kakata corridor, ongoing project implementation of the Boima and RIA corridors, completion of the Ganta, Banga transmission and distribution network, ongoing operation of the cross-border projects covering Nimba, Grand Jita, and Maryland counties. Connections continue to increase and are expected to dramatically increase with the completion of the ongoing T&D projects. However, despite these improvements, the electricity sector faces significant challenges attributed to high commercial losses, high tariffs, lack of investment capital, and low human capacity. Power theft, which hovers around 55%, is the highest in the region. Tariffs, although they have declined by 38%, are still the highest on the continent at 35 US cents per kilowatt hour. There are also major challenges with low management and technical capacity, thus contributing to an over-reliance on expensive foreign expertise. Capital and operational expenditures cannot meet the growing demand for connections, services, and the maintenance of existing electricity infrastructure. Like any infrastructure, proper operation and maintenance is the key to sustainability. However, sustainability of the electricity sector is dependent on the availability of adequate and timely resources, which must come from a commercially viable operation. The parallel growth of new customers and power theft is an alarming phenomenon, which must be urgently addressed if the current gains in the development of Liberia's electricity infrastructure are to make any meaningful impact on development, economic growth, and poverty alleviation. Thank you.
Honorable Captain, thank you very, very much for keeping to time. Let's now turn to our sister, Honorable Cooper, please. 5 minutes. Your mic, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ordu, and thank you very much to the EJS Center and to the Mo Ibrahim Index, the foundation, for inviting me to speak. It's truly an honor. I will be talking a little bit about the rural sector. And I note, as has been presented, that the rural sector has slightly improved over the last decade, but it lags. In Liberia, we lag behind all but 8 other African countries. But in Africa, it's the best subcategory in terms of the foundations for economic opportunity sector. In Liberia, however, it's only the 3rd. It only outperforms infrastructure. And so we must note that infrastructure and the rural sector are 2 subcategories that are intertwined. The land access, looking at some of the subcategories of the rural sector, the land and water access was declining until 2019. And I will speak of in Liberia, we had one game-changing event that occurred in late 2019. So at the close of the last decade, but that is a game changer for us going forward. And that's the passage of the Land Rights Act. Which gives communities greater access to land, and it defines the way that the rural sector operates. Rural sector support is the subcategory that is doing the best in our category, and it's driving our economy, our rural economy, but particularly the agricultural economy, with the projects that are coming through ODA. And then rural businesses and organizations, which is the last category, has declined over the last decade, but have begun to pick up. And there are important elements, again, game-changing elements that are driving this pickup, namely the focus on commercialization, that it has been an all-government approach. What does our rural sector look like in Liberia? We've seen these categories that we're looking at. It's dominated by agriculture, of course, which is one reason why I am speaking to this topic, with some 80% of rural livelihoods, rural households being involved in agriculture in some way. Other areas are mining, of course, transportation and services sectors. The rural sector support, and now I'm jumping to categories. As I said, is the best performing sector with driving positive changes. In Liberia, it's dominated by large projects tied to ODA. The Ministry of Agriculture has a current project portfolio of over $170 million in all 15 counties of the country. When you add in the donor-funded projects managed by NGOs, the amount exceeds $200 million. The trend towards supporting commercialization, however, in agribusinesses and resolving some of the issues around access to finance and markets has been shifting, so that even in ODA, we have the World Bank and IFAD supporting this drive to covering several of our agricultural sectors: rice, cassava, poultry and swine, fruits and vegetable production, as well as our cash crops, cocoa, oil palm, rubber, coming from ODA to catalyze this drive towards commercialization. So we're strengthening rural businesses and organizations. We're striving to develop our input sectors: seeds, feed, fertilizer, machinery, as well as access to finance that has been talked about by some of my other colleagues. The smallholders that are our defining element we're finding new ways to work with them. We're looking at focusing not on mass production, but on quality production, not on primary commodity exports, but value addition exports. So playing to our strengths as smallholders. And as mentioned, the Land Rights Act, the application is ongoing. And one of the things that is also a game changer for Liberia in the decade going forward is the environment and the realization that Liberia is one of the high forest cover landscapes. It is West Africa's most important carbon sink and biodiversity hotspot. How the rural sector is going to interplay with environmental sustainability is going to be one of our game changers. And so the systematic inclusion of our smallholders, our SMEs, our small businesses, our Liberian businesses in the drive in climate smart agriculture, in conservation of our forest patrimony. Those are the things that are going to be driving the rural sector. And I would like to thank you very much for that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Honorable Cooper. What I'd like to do now is you have all laid the ground and teed off very beautifully, taking off from what we heard from our friends at the Mo Ibrahim Foundation. I'd like to pose a couple of questions to each of you in the various sectors, and it'd be absolutely greatly appreciated if you could keep your remarks as short as possible. Let's start with the public administration and measures to boost tax revenue in Liberia. Honorable Kamara, as you know, to effectively deliver development benefits for our people in Liberia, countries need to raise about 30% of GDP through tax revenues. This is what separates us in Africa from many of the other European countries and elsewhere, because they raise over 30% of their development financing from home, right? The average for Africa is 16.5, which is obviously quite far from over 30. And the Mo Ibrahim Index shows that you, by self-admission, mentioned that the trend in tax revenue mobilization is going in the wrong direction. As a former finance minister, how should the government be addressing this? Because as you know, everybody mentioned ODA. ODA is declining. ODA is declining across the board, right? So over to you, Minister.
Oh, thank you. Certainly, it's an issue of concern. And in my own past experience, as long as the basis for tax revenue in our specific case continues to be an over-reliance on the extractive industry, on iron ore, rubber, that sort of model for Liberia since our founding in 1847 is proven not to be the way out.
Right.
So when we're looking forward to domestic resource mobilization, why would we want to advocate for automation of the processes? But what gave birth to a significant or exponential departure from that old order would be to call for serious rethinking of the model that says, let's go by way of economic diversification.
Right.
All right, that over-reliance, we need to get away from the rubber. Can we add value to rubber? Can we begin now the process of looking inward and then producing, giving value to rubber, giving value to cocoa? That would be the only way we can expand the base. And the extent to which we can proceed over 16% or 20%. Just take, for instance, over the last 10 years, the data is saying as a country, our average budget in terms of year on year, going as far back as 2005, we've never exceeded over 500 million as a budget size. When in fact, over the same period, a comparator country, say look at Rwanda, has increased from under the same 500 million budget size to over 8 billion as we speak. What were they doing? One of the things I saw that in the case of Rwanda that we can learn from is that our commitment to to infrastructure. So what percentage of our budget are we just consuming? So as long as the budget is on consumption, and we're not giving significant attention, at least to increase the extent to which public sector investment project can increase to over 30% or 45%, and we have to just mean it. Take austerity measures, cut from the consumption side or the recurrent expenditure side, and then begin to invest in those projects that will deliver on long-term revenue generating capacity. So automation of the process. And another thing I would say is that wherever we can collect, are we collecting it efficiently? The system in place will also be impeding the rate at which what is due government is not reaching the government coffers. Say at the central bank, for example, the consolidated account of the government in both USD, can we then begin to rethink ensuring that what we are collecting now is collected to the full extent and there is no leakage? So I'm proposing the need to sit around the table and then begin to revisit why should there be continuous payment or taxes, say, in commercial banks account other than the central bank. So let there be a centralized collectorate, and let's go that the central bank should be the only one collecting or the depository for all government's tax payment. And take away the splinters in commercial banks, which has created some level of concern over the period as to whether government is actually collecting even whatever that is minimum now, are we executing it to the optimum? So if we can do some of these, we should have some level of change in the
these are very, very useful. These are spoken like an ex-finance minister and central bank governor. Thank you very much. Thank you. Let's turn to business environment. Honorable Dix, Liberia has earned high marks as regards regional integration. I remember the old days of the Mano River Union forming. Liberia was at the front line of that. In ECOWAS, when Yakubu Gowon and the Yadema were pushing the frontiers to form a United States of West Africa, Liberia was right there, right? And so this whole area is also reflected in what we just heard from Ibrahim, how well Liberia is doing in regional integration. However, business regulation is stifling our folks in Liberia, as you know. For example, the World Bank's Doing Business report shows that bureaucratic compliance at Liberia's borders takes importers and exporters 193 hours to comply. In Botswana, and we're not talking of Switzerland or Singapore, in Botswana, a fellow African country, the same processes take 5 hours at the border. I was just wondering, we do have a problem, right? And what would be your thoughts on how we can move up the value chain of doing business by improving the border issue?
Thank you. Well, let me just start by saying, in order for us to hold up our commitment to our ascension to the WTO, we have to move into a digital space. And I think that is one of the barriers that has prevented us from catching up with the rest of the region, because we have to digitize. A lot of our processes are manual, and because of that, there are significant delays. And so we are, working expeditiously to digitize many of our processes. And the Economic Recovery and Transformation Project that I talked to you, mentioned that we were coming on board with the World Bank with, will help us digitize many of our processes. So that is the major hindrance. And so what it's going to allow efficiency, in the way we do business, but it's also going to give that level of comfort and help us align with the commitment we made in terms of our ascendancy to the WTO. Because if we do not reduce the barriers, we are going to continue to impede trade in the country.
Absolutely. No, thank you. Absolutely. That's a short and sweet. Thank you very, very much for keeping to the time. Let's stick with infrastructure. Honorable Member Captain, you had impressively showed us, and the report of the Mo Ibrahim makes it very clear that energy access, mobile communications, the country has done and continues to do very, very well. But the perennial problem is really transport network and connectivity. As an interesting anecdote, I just came back from Vienna, Austria at the weekend, and I could see, for those of you who visited Vienna, the switching between transport modes. You know, at any switching point from rail to metro to, you know, to buses, it's incredible, right? And so transport is a lagging sector in Liberia. Any 2 or 3 quick things you might advise the government on how to push this frontier?
Yes, and we do have the solution. The government created a national road fund with a levy on petroleum products that is supposed to go into a ring-fenced account to pay for investment in transport infrastructure.
Okay.
As CEO of the Millennium Challenge account, we had to cancel $15 million because the road fund was not being applied as intended by law. So funds were diverted for other budgetary purposes. And I think until we get serious about investing in infrastructure, and we thought the solution was to earmark funds that would be ring-fenced for that purpose, just even following that has become problematic. And so we have donors who have just not put any money in. We need to even go from the current road fund infrastructure to a first generation road fund where the monies go directly to the road fund and they've invested into. And part of the reason this road fund was created was because there was never enough money in the budget to support investment, whether it was in maintenance or new roads. So I think it's sticking to best practices in how we do this in developing countries like Liberia, I think is the key. We have the solution, we need to follow it.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I'm glad to hear that the road fund has been set up. And of course, that kind of dedication, especially for routine maintenance and new infrastructure, particularly for our folks in the rural sector, without those sort of connectivity is very difficult. Let's now turn to the rural sector. Honorable Jeanine Cooper, we read every day of emerging technologies that are designed to boost. Hello? Right, we read every day of emerging technologies that are designed to boost productivity in Africa and elsewhere. And I was just wondering, given your long experience in the rural sector, could you share with us any such technological innovations coming out of Liberia that are improving the prospect of our rural folks in your country?
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Ordu. The focus has always been on boosting productivity, but lately we've realized that productivity is not the only answer. Liberia was in the forefront. We set up one of the first research stations in West Africa, if not in Africa, at what's now called the Central Agricultural Research Institution. And we did the research. On high yielding varieties and breeds of animals that are suited for our climate, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of that has been lost because it has not been being applied. But even so, productivity, the realization that productivity is not the only answer is one of the driving ideas behind taking food systems approach, for example, on food production. To look at what are the bottlenecks. Liberia is producing 200,000 to 300,000 metric tons of rice, for example, but across the board, whether it's rice, whether it's plantain, whether it's pepper, farmers are complaining that they don't have access to markets. And so productivity for productivity's sake is not just the answer. So what we are trying to do is to look at the whole value chain. How do we get from seed to plate or bowl, and meeting consumer demands. And the bottlenecks are not so much in boosting yields which has been the approach that we've been taking for the last few decades, but we're now focusing on tackling those other bottlenecks that are restricting us from seeing the benefits of the boosted yields and the benefits of the application of the research that we did so many years ago and that are still ongoing. Thank you.
No, excellent. This is very, very helpful to know. Productivity for productivity's sake. In fact, a friend of mine, Peter, who set up Twiga Farms. You may have heard of Twiga Farms in Nairobi. That's precisely your line of thinking. And what they're doing now, remember he was in Coca-Cola, and he asked himself the question, you can buy Coke in any village in Liberia or Nigeria, right? So how do we then make sure that food also follows the Coke logistics to go to the table in urban areas? And I find Twiga Farms a fascinating experience. So thank you very, very much.
Exactly.
My brother Seward, I believe that before we take audience questions, if you permit us, we will do a very quick second round of questions, if that's okay with you. Yeah?
That's fine.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much. So basically, the next round of questions, be great to have every one of you to opine on this, because one of the things that we all witnessed during the period of 2014 to 2016 was this whole notion of the devastating impact of the Ebola crisis in Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea, of course. And now we're faced with the COVID-19 pandemics. I was just wondering, from the benefit of where you all sit, what are the lessons from the Ebola crisis that Liberia is now using to do as relatively better than its neighbors as we now observe? First, Honorable Kamara.
If that's a question to me, I'm not part of the implementing government now at present.
No problem.
However,
you have the money. You have the money, right?
Yes, yeah. I will say, judging from what was done in 2014, given the outbreak of the Ebola crisis,
right?
The leadership position was leading from the front, so we need that, especially now.
Yeah.
Where you bring all stakeholders to the table,
right?
Both public and private sector actors.
Yeah.
And one thing I would say, then there has to be that leadership demonstrated to say, if we are asking for support, be it from the partners, be it from the private sector, government must show up some level of a tangible or statement that says, we are going to put 10 million on the table. We need a matching from the private sector and partners by another 10 million.
Right.
In the context of vaccination, should that be something that we can be advocating for as a government leading from the front? So you put like 10 million on the table and say, partners, we are calling you to match this.
Right.
That could be another way that you can woo in support in a tangible way and get this process of the vaccine relating to the COVID-19 at least handy and ready to distribute to the population. And then the extent to which the rate of spread could be brought under control and the economy. And I just want to say that everything we're having in terms of this conversation around the Foundation for Economic Opportunity is not a standalone.
No.
As long as there's an issue regarding the health system, as long as there's an issue regarding the rule of law, as long as there's an issue regarding human development performance, they do have implications as to how the foundations for the economy to thrive will be. So I would just say we need that sort of leadership, and we need government to lead from the front.
Okay, great. Thank you very, very much. Honorable Diggs, very briefly, any additional supplement to what he said?
Yes, actually, twin shocks, Ebola and then COVID, right?
Yes,
so
yes.
I think we had a short-lived period of economic growth, 2017, 2018, but we clearly saw macroeconomic instability. There are vulnerabilities within the financial sector and an overall growth slowdown in 2019, which has really affected us in terms of the impact that COVID-19 truly had on us and still having. So what we've come to realize is that as the economy recovers, we have to accelerate growth in terms of requiring a higher degree of wage-based work force and entrepreneurial job creation. And that's where those SMEs come into play in truly being the driver of the growth of our economy. And so we have to pay keen attention as government and be very intentional in how we engage those SMEs, because that is what's going to help boost our economy, but also facilitate trade and the growth overall in our business sector. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. And for the next question, I would like to turn to Honorable Captain and Madam Cooper, because Liberia is one of those countries on our continent with a huge proportion of diaspora, right? And so this question is about remittances from the diaspora to Liberia. Donor funds, as we already talked about earlier, are declining. Foreign direct investment is declining. The growth we expected to be happening in the continent were being set back by COVID-19. For Liberia, remittances remain a vital lifeblood, as you all know, accounting for as high as 10% of Liberia's GDP, and therefore making Liberia one of the top 10 destinations on the continent as far as remittances are concerned. So what measures are being taken to further boost remittance flows into the country? Madam Cooper.
Okay, thank you very much. You're very right. If you take the dollar value of remittances to Liberia, it looks very small. But if you take the proportion of our GDP, it's quite high. It's a very important contributor to our national development. An interesting trend has come about over the last, and probably driven by your earlier question on Ebola and COVID. The narrative that was drowned out in the Ebola response and drowned out again about the COVID is how the Liberian diaspora actually supported Liberia, and how Liberians themselves, whether in the diaspora at home, buckled up and relied on their own resilience to overcome not only the disease but the economic devastation that both diseases have caused us. We're highly import dependent country. So what we've seen, particularly in the agriculture sector, but I've seen it also in the entrepreneurial sector, is innovation, is people investing their monies now in restarting farms, in the growth of the consumer packaged goods industry has exploded in the last few years, coming out of that self-reliance idea. And the diaspora is very, very much a part of that. They're investing money. There's you talk about Twiga. There's very interesting models that are developing. For example, there's a group called Agriculture Liberia, where they have subscriptions from diaspora people, and they put those subscriptions towards planting rice and vegetable farms here in Liberia. We're seeing more and more of that. We're seeing more and more people coming home, starting up their farms, investing, not on a large scale, plantation scale as maybe in the 50s, but certainly starting up something, starting businesses. And I'm sure I've seen, the Ministry of Agriculture has recorded a 60% increase in the number of agribusinesses, and I'm counting 2019 and 2020 put together. We have increased more in 2021 from January to August than we did in 2019 and 2020 put together, and that's a result of the COVID, the lockdown, people sitting down and thinking, how can we support? There's remittances are not just coming in dollars. People are buying goods for their families here, buying agricultural produce, buying rice, buying things like that. So, and there are services that are are catering to that. So
Right.
yes, let me
All
stop there.
No, thank you very, very much. Brother Captain, same point.
Yeah, yes, I think from a purely anecdotal basis, I suspect that most of the remittances are intended for maintenance of family members.
Right.
And I think what we need to see is a transition from remittances for that purpose towards maybe investment in enterprises or development of property and so forth.
Right.
But I think one of the impediments to that is the fact that we still have a challenge addressing the question of dual citizenship.
Mhm.
And I believe that anyone in the diaspora who is denied their Liberian citizenship because they have a citizenship outside
Mhm.
will not feel that sense of identity
No.
that they should feel. They'll always feel that they're sort of treated as outsiders. And maybe the willingness to remit and invest on a more substantive level, I think is curtailed by that sense. And I think that is why the debate on the question of dual citizenship needs to continue, especially for Liberians. We had a national referendum recently. It failed.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it failed. And in this day and age, to see an important constitutional amendment fail like that, I think speaks. We need to look to Ghana. Ghana is one example where they addressed the question of dual citizenship, and remittances have significantly increased and play a major role in the development of that.
No, great. Thank you very much. I see Brother Kamara has his hand up. Do you want to very, very quickly because we need to switch to audience questions?
Yes, Dr. Ordu, is just to say on the questions of remittance, it's now 1-2 million you're talking about. On average, you're talking about close to 200 million.
Yeah.
So it makes a significant dent.
Yeah.
When that will constitute over close to around 40 to 50% of our budget, the size of our national budget. So
absolutely,
as long as the policy environment is right and policies are being seen as friendly towards your own, we think that we can achieve a whole lot.
Reminds me of a saying in my village in Nigeria: charity begins at home, right? So, okay, so I think I had seen Ophelia had her hand up, or was that a misreading? Before we switch to the audience questions. Ophelia, did you have your hand up?
It was a misreading.
Okay. Thank you very much for correcting me. Thank you. And so Ines and Camille, the audience questions, are there any? Because I don't have access to them. So whoever has access to them can basically help us with 2 or 3, and then we run it by the panel before we hand back over to my brother Seward. Were there any anyway? Were there any audience questions?
There is one question relating to education and business, the establishment of business schools that could help to promote economic development. And that question is in the chat from Professor Richard America.
Fantastic. All right. So shall we start with Madam Cooper, please?
Sorry, I don't see the question. I'm trying to get it.
Right. The issue was setting up business school, right? If I hear you correctly, Seward, that was the question.
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah.
His idea, which comes in the form of a comment, is the establishment of strong business schools to help to foster economic development by use of the private sector.
Okay. Private sector driven business school. How about that? Before we go to Sister Diggs.
Well, for me, I think one of the things that I mentioned in my opening remarks is the focus that we have now on commercialization and looking at smallholder farmers, etc. Even our universities, and I know you had a panel earlier that spoke to this this issue. Even our universities are looking at combining agriculture and business, which is something it's been a part of our economic development, but at a large scale. When you're talking about multiple thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions maybe, smallholders, everything about us is small. The smallholders, artisanal, SMEs, etc., etc. Very, very few, a tiny percentage would elevate to the category of medium enterprise or large scale enterprise. How do you reach all of those groups? And in the agriculture sector, we're looking at a system of agropoles, clustering, our production centers, and they're driving. Well, in agriculture, they don't call it teaching, they call it training. So driving training and familiarization with everything. But we also have to find ways that we can capitalize on digitalization, because it's quite a huge percentage of Liberians that have access to mobile phones. Maybe not all smartphones, but something like 80%. I got that figure from Orange some years ago. High percentage have access to mobile phones, and a high percentage have access to digital. Can we find different ways that we can train and teach?
Yeah.
We don't have, all schools are now, especially since COVID, schools are now virtual.
Right.
We're having this conference that would otherwise be sitting face to face. We're doing it commercially increasingly. So we're finding ways to increase training and teaching and imparting, sharing knowledge, let's say, and sharing best practices digitally. We're not there yet, but that's the trend, and that's the way, that the direction that we're going. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Honorable Diggs, please. Thank you very much, Madam Cooper.
Thank you. Well, I definitely think the more we can educate people about what it really means to begin a business, to own a business, to run a business, and be successful in it, I think that will take us a long way, because a lot of the things we realize is those that are within those SMEs, you know, there's very weak management capabilities. There's lack of diversification, or very limited diversification when it comes to, you know, the businesses, starting the business and maintaining the business. And so one thing that I'm a big proponent of as we work with our development partners, you know, as funds become available to help grow and support SMEs, it's important that we link it with training. So there should be adequate training for developing business plans, for, you know, the financial aspect of how to manage the fiscal resources that are given. And so, yes, I think we can get to a level where there are business schools, but we also have to tie in those training, the basic business management training that comes along with the funds that will help these SMEs grow, because we always talk limited, you know, financial access, but as financial access becomes more available, the education in terms of responsibly managing those fiscal resources is critical. And so that's something we have to move along with, access to finances, but also access to the training and skills that is required to run a business. So I think in the long run, we can continue to encourage business schools, because we see more people with the entrepreneurial mindset. But I think in the short term, we can really look at how we can build those capacities in managing businesses as we improve access to finances.
Great, thank you very much. I know that my two brothers, Kamara and Captan, have views on this subject. But before I turn to you on this particular subject, I wanted you two to address what I consider an even more important subject of gender. All right, because the center today hosting us is the Ellen Johnson Center for Women and Development, which is fantastic. There are not many such centers on our continent. One of the biggest challenges we face in Africa is women in leadership, women in parliament, women in boardrooms, women in technology, and I could go on and on and on. In each of these areas in Africa, as we'll all agree, we are tremendously challenged. I wondered whether, Honorable Kamara, you can basically share with us very briefly how we can really solve this problem.
I think it would just be an issue about, in the case of Liberia, the extent to which we allow the laws to reflect the action to be taken and respect the laws and give women the space, things should work. But I would say, sometimes the extent to which you may put, like within the UN system at the moment, we're fighting for 50% gender representation balance. But the likelihood could be, there could be greater women in terms of number who are more competent and could rise above the 50% threshold. What then do you do? Do you limit them? So my take on this will be create a space, the space in which women can be empowered, invest, especially say in the context of the budget. Gender mainstreaming, is it a part of our budget process? To which the role of the woman in the society is being funded through government. Say some of the things we are talking about in terms of capacity development. Have we asked ourselves, are the curriculum taught at the universities, our universities, linked to the job market? Are we having conversation with the commercial banks? Are there issues regarding the private sector? What are the limitations that we can tailor within our curriculum taught in Liberian university, that students are taught and the capacity is developed there, so that private sector, at the end of the day, it becomes country-specific. So the job market is country-specific, aligned to the issues confronting the labor market. So that would be my take for now.
Okay, I know we're just about our main host is about to come on. So before I turn back to Seward, very quickly, Monie, my brother Captain, on the same issue, how do we on gender?
Let me begin by apologizing because I'm going to give you a very unconventional answer to this question, and it's more from a social perspective. I think we have to stop empowering women on the basis of favors to men. This has discouraged too many young women from moving up professionally. That the only way they can get a promotion, the only way they can get help, the only way they can move up merit-wise professionally is that they have to render some sort of a favor to some guy, and that becomes the only channel they know. And this has discouraged a lot of well-meaning women from moving up. And I think from a social perspective, we need to put an end to it, and we need to attack that problem. And people need to go out. We have to name and shame managers, people in senior positions who take advantage of women and create impediments to their growth.
Right. Any thoughts, Madam Cooper, to what you just heard?
That was unconventional for sure. And yes, he hit the nail on the head. But this being said, you know, there's in the agriculture sector, let me use that one. They say 60%, 70% of the work is done by women. I was in the agriculture sector before becoming minister, and I will go out there in the fields, and I challenge that 60% notion. It's closer to 90%.
Wow.
But when it comes to discussing agriculture, I go in the field, it's the women who plant, it's the women who manage the farms, it's the women who harvest, it's the women who then keep the harvest, dry it, process it, cook the food, and in many instances feed the family. So where is that 60%? Where the other 40%? So I would challenge it in that way. However, whenever there was a discussion about finances, about you know, the planning for the farm engagement, I was running a farming business. It's always the men. It's either the brother, the husband, the father, the son, in many cases the nephew. They will have a man come forward. So there are traditional norms that have to be tackled, and we have to look at some of the there's much more I can say on the topic and write on it, but there's other ways that we have to find ways that we can build the confidence of women, particularly in the rural areas. And yeah, probably here for rural sector, the rural areas, for those women to be able to step up,
right,
and they manage, and maybe they already do. Maybe they already do manage those decisions that the men come forward and speak up to.
No, that's great.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Brother Siwa, do we have a chance to give half a minute to each of our panelists to any last minute thing they want to say while we're waiting for Madam President?
Actually, I think Madam is on. She's waiting for us to wrap up this session
okay.
right now. So
okay.
if they can faithfully take 30 seconds each, I think that would be beneficial, and then we can move on.
No, thank you very much, my brother. And you heard, panelists, you heard him. 30 seconds, please. Sound bites, Madam Cooper.
Thank you very much. This IIAG is excellent for us to be able to gauge our progress. It's an excellent baseline. Right. The first 10 years have been measured. Let's look at the next 10 years, and we have targets now that we can speak to. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Great, thank you very much. Honorable Diggs.
Thank you for the opportunity, and forums such as these is definitely a great opportunity to properly unpack the information that has been shared by the IIAG. And, you know, as the African parable says, if you want to do something fast, you do it alone. But if you want to do something well, you do it together. So I think collaboratively, we can really move the needle on this. Thank you.
Fantastic, fantastic. Brother Captan?
Well, I think we need to take ownership of infrastructure development in our countries. Too often, we've allowed donors to drive that sector of our development. And this is why priorities are not determined by us, but by other people. And I think we need to take ownership. Thank you.
Fantastic. Brother Kamara, very quickly.
Yes, my conclusion would be in terms of the overall ranking as a country, we are at 47 along the 4 structures, pillars in terms of participation, rights, and inclusion, security and rule of law, human development, and that of the Foundation for Economic Foundation. We should task ourselves to at least be under 20 as a country and work towards that, because our average is around 30.
Right.
So when we task ourselves, then we'll work towards that goal along all of the 4 thematic areas.
Fantastic. You all have been excellent and exemplary panelists. I'd like to thank you all for your contributions. A special thanks to the Mo Ibrahim team, Camilla and Ines, for the presentation and the work you guys do. We are all very, very proud of you, because the Mo Ibrahim Foundation has really relentlessly called our attention across our continent that a number of things are key to move our continent forward. 1, good governance matters. 2, leadership matters. 3, institutions matter. And the trust between citizens and our leaders is vital if Africa is to go someplace. And I think that's precisely what is behind the Ellen Johnson Sirleaf Center, which for our host today. And I would like to really, really thank them also for the opportunity to be here. This is fantastic. I know we've done this on Zoom. I'm waiting for Brother Seward after COVID, when these sort of sessions could be held in person in Monrovia. Thank you very much to our listeners. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Aloysius. This has been an excellent presentation, excellent conversation, insightful. The whole IIAG instrument has been a diagnostic tool, and we've heard some prescriptions. At this particular time, I would like to introduce the founder and current chair of the board of directors of the Ellen Johnson Sirleaf Center for Women and Development, Her Excellency, Madam Sirleaf.
Thank you, Stewart. Thanks to the Mo Ibrahim Foundation for the tremendous work and to the IIAG staff that has joined us in today's discussion. Thanks also to our host, to you, Seward, to our moderators, the list of esteemed panelists, and special thanks to our government officials who have taken the time to join us in this discussion. Thanks also to the several citizens and friends at home and abroad who have tuned in. We have heard so much today about Liberia's growth and decline as documented by the IIAG. We have also noted what has been said about the measures taken under consideration to address the decline. Liberia has made good progress in security. Well, let me come back and say I'm going to try to summarize each of the major sessions. And so I'll start with Liberia has made good progress in security but falls behind in the rule of law. The respect and support for integrated institutions by both leaders and people will lead to implementation, transparency, and accountability. There have been significant gains in our areas of the rights of women, girls, and the marginalization in terms of education and health. Structural measures do exist, and systemic inclusion remains a problem that we will continue to address through laws, policies, promoted by leaders in compact with the people. Access to well-functioning institutions that promote rights is the key to improve this area. In our next area, as found in a determination of effective response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the interlink of education and health, this is human development, ensures an enhanced human development. Given low national capacity, more attention is required in promoting and supporting technical education. It was noted that Liberia has effective laws and policies for the promotion of human development, but the lack of compliance and enforcement minimizes the intended effect. Public-private partnerships can enhance human development access to health education and can thereby enhance the work of the economy. Coming to the area that you all have participated in, the area of Foundation for Economic Opportunity. The IIAG started in 2007 and covers a period of 10 years. The early years covered by the index reflected significant growth of the economy, registering an average annual 8.7% by the end of the year 2014. The event of the Ebola virus started the period of decline. And I believe we have yet to recover from that. Today, our panelists cited the many gains we have had over the period of the past several years and the challenges that we continue to face. We also noted the several measures, policies, and actions that have been taken or are under consideration to ensure that the economy continues to build a firm foundation. An important mitigant in this regard is the functioning of strong, independent institutions. A partnership with a vibrant private sector and a compact with the people we lead. Once again, I want to say thank you to all of you. We have taken good notes of all the things that have been said, and the center, whatever it can do, and certainly in partnership with the Mo Abraham Foundation, whom we work, is to do whatever we can so that when we get to the next index, we would like to say that all of you who are part of today's responsibility to grow this economy and to build this country, that when we get to A, we can point to you and say, yes, you did what you were supposed to do to address that decline, to see that Liberia once again can shine in terms of positive responses in the next IIAG. So we'll be looking to you to do what is necessary to achieve that goal. Thanks to all of you for this great day. It's something we've been long wanting to have, and you've just made it happen because of your presence and your participation. Thank you, Seward. Thank you, Dr. Weeks, for arranging this.
My pleasure. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you very much.
So that concludes
Yeah.
the mapping process of Liberia on the IIAG. And with that, we bid you farewell.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
I'm
Goodbye.
clapping.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Madam.
you, everyone.
Okay, thanks, Camilla. Thanks.